The prosthetic arm caught the handlebar for just a split second, a soft scrape of metal against chrome as Captain Frank Torres, 72, steadied himself on the wooden pier. The Harley-Davidson rocked slightly, its polished tank catching the afternoon sun like a mirror. "Sorry about that," Frank said quietly, his weathered hand gesturing toward the barely visible scratch on the chrome. "Didn't mean to—" Jake Razor Morrison didn't let him finish. 28 years old, leather vest covered in patches he'd never earned, sunglasses reflecting the marina. He stepped forward, boots heavy on the pier planks. "Keep your robot parts away from real bikes, fake vet." The words cut through the salt air like a blade. Around them, the rally continued. Dozens of motorcycles, men in leather claiming brotherhood they'd never bled for. Phones came out immediately. Someone laughed. A woman with a beer bottle turned to get a better view. Frank's prosthetic arm, military-grade titanium, Navy issue from 1987, gleamed in the sunlight. The inscription was small, barely visible unless you knew where to look. USS Liberty, 12 lives saved. But Jake didn't look. He saw an old man with fake parts and decided that was reason enough. Frank said nothing. Just stood there, shoulders square despite his age, the kind of stillness that comes from watching horizons for enemies that never came home. If you believe no veteran should be treated this way, type honor below. Your voice matters more than you think. Most people at the Sunset Marina rally walked past Frank without a second glance. To them, he was just another old man trying to fit in with the weekend warriors. 72 years old, Navy retired, 38 years of service that ended when a boiler explosion took his right arm and nearly took his life. He didn't come to the rally looking for brotherhood. He came because his daughter Maria had suggested he get out more, connect with other veterans. The irony would hit him later. This crowd of leather-clad imposters calling themselves warriors, while the only real veteran among them stood bleeding. Frank wore a simple blue button-down, sleeves rolled up to accommodate the prosthetic. On his left collar, a small Navy pin caught the light. Nothing flashy, nothing demanding attention, just the quiet dignity of a man who'd served when it mattered. That afternoon was warmer than most. Frank moved carefully between the rows of motorcycles, admiring the craftsmanship even as the owners ignored his existence. His prosthetic arm responded smoothly to neural impulses, titanium fingers adjusting grip automatically. Technology paid for by a grateful nation, earned by actions he'd never fully discussed with anyone. The Harley he'd accidentally touched was immaculate. Chrome polished to perfection, custom paint job depicting eagles and flags. Jake Morrison's pride and joy, bought with inheritance money and decorated with valor he'd never possessed. Frank examined the tiny scratch his prosthetic had left. Barely visible, really. The kind of thing that could be buffed out in minutes. He reached into his pocket for a handkerchief, intending to wipe away any residue. "I said keep your damn hands off it," Jake's voice carried across the pier. Conversation stopped. Engines quieted. Frank looked up slowly, his gray eyes meeting Jake's sunglasses. "Son, I'm just trying to—" "Don't sun me, Gramps. You walk around here with that thing." Jake pointed directly at the prosthetic. "Acting like you're some kind of hero. We know your type. Stolen valor makes me sick." A circle began forming. Phones rose higher. Someone muttered about live streaming. Frank felt the weight of their stares, the casual cruelty of spectators who'd turned tragedy into entertainment. But there was something else about that prosthetic arm. Something Jake couldn't see, wouldn't understand even if he looked closely. Beneath the titanium exterior, etched into the internal frame where only Frank and his doctors knew to find it, was a different inscription. Medal of Honor recipient. Actions above and beyond. Frank had never mentioned the medal to anyone at the marina. Never wore it, never displayed it. Heroes, real heroes, didn't need audiences. He stood perfectly still as Jake's friends gathered around, their patches declaring allegiances to units they'd never served in, campaigns they'd never fought. The afternoon sun glinted off chrome and leather while Frank remained upright, quiet, like he was waiting for orders that would never come. The weight of their ignorance pressed against him like a physical force. 37 years of carrying this secret, 37 years of watching fake warriors parade their stolen valor while the real thing stood invisible among them. But Frank had learned long ago that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. Inside his shirt pocket, his phone buzzed once. A text from Maria. "Flying back from base. Home for dinner? Miss you, Dad." Frank typed back with his remaining hand. "Looking forward to it, sweetheart." He had no idea he'd be calling her emergency line in less than an hour. The crowd grew hungry for confrontation. What started as Jake's personal affront became the afternoon's entertainment. Phones recorded from multiple angles. Someone started a live stream titled, "Fake Vet Gets Called Out." "Check this out," Jake announced to his growing audience. "This old-timer walks around with his robot arm, probably bought it online, thinks he can play soldier with the real deal." Frank's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Couldn't speak. Because in 1987, on the USS Liberty, when the boiler room exploded and took 3 men immediately, Frank Torres had made a choice that cost him his arm and saved 12 lives. The prosthetic wasn't purchased. It was earned in fire and blood and screaming metal. But Jake Morrison had never heard screaming metal, had never felt the heat of a ship burning around him, had never pulled unconscious sailors through twisted steel while his own arm hung useless, shattered beyond repair. "Show us your discharge papers, hero," Jake taunted, circling Frank like a predator. "Bet you got some sob story about how you lost that arm. What was it? Motorcycle accident? Industrial mishap? Come on, Gramps, entertain us." The circle tightened. Men in leather vests pressed closer, their patches telling stories of service they'd never seen. 82nd Airborne, Rangers, Special Forces, Marines. A stolen valor convention masquerading as a veterans rally. Frank remained silent, but his left hand moved slightly to his shirt pocket. Inside, a small leather wallet contained his military ID, his discharge papers, and a folded citation he'd never shown anyone. The Medal of Honor paperwork signed by a president whose name these men probably couldn't spell. "Nothing to say?" Jake's voice rose higher. "That's what I thought. You fake vets are all the same. Big hardware, no story that checks out." A teenager with green hair live-streamed from her phone. "OMG, you guys. They're totally exposing this fake soldier. This is going viral for sure." Frank looked at her, then at the crowd, then at Jake. For 38 years, he'd served in silence. 3 deployments, 2 citations, 1 Medal of Honor, and a prosthetic arm that reminded him every day what real sacrifice looked like. Still, he said nothing. That's when Jake decided silence meant guilt. Decided a 72-year-old man standing alone deserved judgment from someone who'd never stood for anything. The punch came fast and brutal. A right cross that caught Frank on the left cheek, the sound echoing off the marina's wooden pier like a gunshot. Frank, caught off balance, stumbled backward. His prosthetic arm reached out instinctively for support that wasn't there. He hit the pier hard. Wooden planks groaned under the impact. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, bright red against weathered skin. The crowd went silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then someone cheered. Another person laughed. Jake flexed his knuckles and grinned at his audience. "That's what happens to liars," he announced. "Real veterans died for this country. Fakes like you make me sick." Frank lay still for a moment, tasting blood and salt air. His prosthetic arm caught the sunlight, titanium gleaming against the wooden pier. Somewhere in the crowd, phones continued recording. Nobody offered to help him up. Some medals are worn on the chest, others are worn in the soul. Frank sat up slowly, wooden splinters catching on his shirt. His cheek throbbed where Jake's fist had connected, but the pain was nothing compared to what he'd felt when shrapnel tore through his arm 37 years ago. This was just humiliation. He'd survived worse. The crowd dispersed gradually, losing interest now that the entertainment was over. Jake strutted back to his Harley, accepting congratulations from his fellow imposters. Someone bought him a beer. A girl with a smartphone asked for his number. Frank remained on the pier, alone. He reached into his shirt with his remaining hand and touched the small object hanging from a chain around his neck. Not dog tags, those were in a drawer at home. This was different, heavier. A bronze star suspended from a blue ribbon, hidden beneath his civilian clothes like a secret he'd never told. The Medal of Honor. Awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. The citation was specific. Captain Frank Torres had entered a burning compartment 3 separate times, carrying out 12 unconscious sailors while the ship's boiler room exploded around him. The third trip cost him his right arm when a bulkhead collapsed. Frank had never worn the medal publicly, never mentioned it in conversations, never used it to demand respect or recognition. Heroes, real heroes, didn't need audiences. But sitting on that pier, blood drying on his lip while fake veterans celebrated their righteousness, Frank felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, the desire to be seen. He pulled out his phone with shaking fingers. The screen showed several missed calls from telemarketers, a text from his neighbor about picking up mail, and one contact he'd hoped never to use. Shark 1, emergency only. Maria had insisted he program the number when she made Colonel. Dad, if you're ever in real trouble, real danger, you call me. I don't care where I am or what I'm doing. You call me, Frank had protested. He'd raised her to be independent, taught her that Torres family members solved their own problems. But Maria had inherited his stubborn streak along with his sense of duty. Promise me, Dad. Promise. He'd promised. Frank's thumb hovered over the contact. This wasn't life-threatening danger. This was just an old man who'd been humiliated by punks who wouldn't last 5 minutes in real combat. Maria was probably in meetings or training or dealing with actual emergencies that mattered. But then he heard Jake's laughter carrying across the water. Heard someone say, "Did you see that fake vet go down? Priceless." Frank pressed the button. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "Colonel Torres." "Maria," Frank said quietly. "It's your father. I need you." The line went silent for exactly 5 seconds. When Maria spoke again, her voice carried the kind of authority that made career soldiers straighten their spines. Location? Sunset Marina, Pier 7. ETA 20 minutes. Stay exactly where you are, Dad. Nobody moves you until I get there. The line went dead. Frank put the phone back in his pocket and touched the Medal of Honor through his shirt one more time. 20 minutes. He could wait 20 minutes. Behind him, Jake Morrison continued celebrating his victory over a fake veteran, completely unaware that he'd just assaulted a Medal of Honor recipient whose daughter commanded one of the Army's most elite special operations units. Some mistakes take time to reveal themselves. This one had exactly 18 minutes left. The sound came first, low, rhythmic, growing stronger. Conversations around the marina began to slow as people looked toward the horizon, shielding their eyes against the afternoon sun. Frank didn't move from his position on the pier. He knew that sound, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of military rotors cutting through air. UH-60 Blackhawk probably inbound from Fort Bragg, right on schedule. Jake Morrison was in the middle of retelling his heroic story about putting a fake veteran in his place when the helicopter appeared over the tree line. Matte black, no markings visible from a distance, flying low and fast toward the marina. "What the hell?" someone muttered. Phones came out again, this time filming the sky instead of the pier. The Blackhawk circled once as if surveying the area, then descended toward the marina's parking lot. Wind from the rotors scattered debris across the pier. Beer bottles rolled, napkins whirled through the air. Several motorcycles rocked violently on their stands, chrome gleaming as they swayed. Jake grabbed his sunglasses as they nearly flew off his face, his confident posture beginning to crack as the military precision unfolding before him started to register. People filming with their phones struggled to keep their cameras steady against the rotor wash. Someone's hat flew into the water. A woman's hair whipped across her face as she tried to capture the scene. The entire marina had become a chaos of wind and noise and confusion. "Must be some kind of training exercise," Jake shouted over the noise, but his voice carried less certainty now, less of the bravado that had carried him through assaulting an elderly man. The Blackhawk touched down with practiced precision. Dust and gravel swirled in all directions. Through the chaos, Frank watched the aircraft's side door slide open. 6 figures emerged in tactical gear. Full combat equipment, weapons secured but visible, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that comes from years of training and deployment. They fanned out in a defensive perimeter around the helicopter, eyes scanning the crowd with professional assessment. Then she stepped out. Colonel Maria Torres, 45, Army Special Forces, walked from the Black Hawk like she owned the world. No sunglasses, no swagger, just command presence radiating from every step. Her uniform was crisp despite the helicopter ride, silver eagles on her collar catching the light. Behind her, more soldiers emerged, an entire special operations team. The marina fell silent except for the helicopter's cooling engines. Maria's eyes swept the crowd, cataloging faces, assessing threats, until they found what she was looking for. Her father, sitting on the pier with blood on his face. Her expression didn't change, didn't harden, didn't soften. Professional soldiers learn to control emotion until the mission is complete. But everyone watching could feel the temperature drop 10 degrees. She walked directly toward Frank, her team maintaining position around the helicopter. Conversations stopped, engines turned off. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jake Morrison, still clutching his beer and standing near his scratched Harley, watched this procession with growing confusion. Military types always thought they owned every situation, but this was a civilian marina. They had no authority here. Maria reached her father and knelt beside him on the pier. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet enough that only Frank could hear. "Dad, you okay?" Frank nodded slowly. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just some punks with more mouth than sense." Maria examined the blood on his lip, the bruising already forming on his cheek. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Which one?" Frank's eyes shifted toward Jake, who was now staring at this unexpected military intervention with the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, he'd made an error in judgment. Maria stood and turned toward the crowd. When she spoke, her voice carried across the entire marina with the kind of authority that makes civilians remember why they sleep safely at night. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Colonel Maria Torres, United States Army Special Forces. I'm looking for the individual who assaulted a veteran at this location approximately 25 minutes ago." The silence was absolute. Jake Morrison felt every eye on the pier turned toward him. His leather vest, covered in patches from units he'd never served in, suddenly felt heavier than body armor. "That would be me," he said, trying to summon the bravado that had carried him through the afternoon. "But your dad here isn't a veteran. He's a fake, and I called him on it." Maria looked at Jake for a long moment. Then she reached into her father's shirt pocket and withdrew a small leather wallet. From it, she removed a folded piece of paper and held it up for everyone to see. "Captain Frank Torres, United States Navy. 38 years of service, 3 deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star, and 1 Medal of Honor for actions aboard the USS Liberty in 1987, where he lost his right arm, saving 12 sailors from a boiler room explosion." She paused, letting that information sink into the crowd's collective consciousness. "This fake veteran," her voice carried the kind of contempt that could freeze blood, "has more honor in his prosthetic arm than all of you combined." Jake's face went white. Around him, his fellow veterans began backing away, suddenly very interested in examining their motorcycles. "Ma'am," Jake started, his voice cracking, "I didn't know. Nobody touches my father. Nobody." The words hit like a physical force. Maria stepped closer to Jake, and though she was 6 inches shorter, everyone present understood exactly who held the power in this situation. "You want to know about real veterans?" Maria continued. "You want to know what service looks like? My father taught me. Every lesson about duty, honor, and sacrifice came from watching him. When I was 8 years old, I watched him learn to tie his shoes with one hand because he'd given the other one for his country. When I was 16, I watched him cry at a funeral for a sailor he'd saved who died of cancer 20 years later. When I was 22, I watched him refuse a disability check because he said other veterans needed it more." The crowd was transfixed. This wasn't just military authority, this was personal. That man taught me what it means to serve, what it means to sacrifice, what it means to stand up when standing up costs you everything. And today you punched him in the face because he accidentally scratched your motorcycle." Jake Morrison, tough guy of the Leather Vest Brigade, began to cry. Maria turned to address the entire crowd. "How many of you are actual veterans?" Silence. "How many of you have ever served your country in any capacity beyond putting a flag decal on your car?" More silence. "That's what I thought." Maria looked back at Jake. "You're going to apologize to my father, then you're going to walk away, and if I ever hear about you disrespecting another veteran, real or otherwise, I will find you." Jake nodded frantically. Tears streamed down his face as he approached Frank, who had remained seated on the pier throughout this entire confrontation. "Sir," Jake whispered, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Frank looked up at him with tired eyes. "Son, the problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is that you didn't care." Within an hour, the video had spread across every social media platform. Not the edited versions from earlier. Those had been taken down by shame-faced posters. This was the raw footage of Colonel Maria Torres defending her father, revealing his Medal of Honor, and reducing a room full of fake veterans to silent witnesses of their own ignorance. The Marina management issued an immediate statement. Effective immediately, Sunset Marina would host an annual Veterans Day ceremony. The pier where Frank had been assaulted would be renamed Captain Torres Memorial Pier, with a bronze plaque commemorating his service. Jake Morrison disappeared from social media entirely. His Harley, the one with the tiny scratch that started everything, was sold the following week. The buyer was a Navy veteran who'd served on the USS Liberty and remembered Captain Torres's heroism. Frank returned to the marina exactly 1 month later, not for a rally but for the dedication ceremony. Maria stood beside him as the mayor unveiled the bronze plaque. "In honor of Captain Frank Torres, Medal of Honor recipient, who taught us that true service requires no audience." The crowd was different this time. Real veterans, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes, all standing with the kind of respect that comes from shared understanding. Among them, a handful of the original rally attendees who'd stayed to witness Frank's humiliation now stood in silent tribute to his dignity. Jake Morrison was there too, in the back, wearing a simple button-down shirt with no patches, no claims of valor he hadn't earned. He'd driven 6 hours to attend, not to seek forgiveness but to understand what honor actually looked like. When the ceremony ended, Frank walked to the end of the pier, the same spot where he'd fallen, where his blood had stained the wood. Maria walked beside him, her arm linked with his, the same way she'd done as a little girl when he'd taught her to be brave. "You know what the best part about today is?" Frank said quietly. "What's that, Dad?" For the first time in 37 years, that Medal of Honor felt like it was supposed to be worn. Behind them, the American flag flew at full staff, catching the afternoon breeze off the water. The sound of helicopters was absent now, replaced by the gentle lapping of waves against the pier and the quiet conversations of people who finally understood the difference between wearing valor and earning it. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, approached Frank hesitantly. His father, a current Navy sailor, had brought him to the ceremony to meet a real hero. "Sir," the boy said, "my dad says you saved people." Frank knelt down, his prosthetic arm gleaming in the sunlight. "I did what anyone would do, son. But you lost your arm." "I gained 12 brothers." The boy looked confused for a moment, then smiled. "That's a good trade." Frank laughed, the first real laugh he'd had in months. "Yeah, kid, that's a very good trade." As the sun set over Sunset Marina, Frank Torres sat on the bench that now bore his name, surrounded by real veterans and real respect. His prosthetic arm rested on the armrest, no longer hidden, no longer a source of shame, but a symbol of sacrifice willingly given. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter flew overhead, just a training flight, nothing urgent. Frank watched it disappear into the evening sky and smiled. Some battles are won with weapons, others are won with truth. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you have a daughter who knows the difference and isn't afraid to use both. If this story touched you as much as it touched me while researching it, consider supporting this work. Each story takes hours to be treated with the respect these heroes deserve. Buy Me a Coffee link is pinned in the first comment, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. We have more stories that need to be told.